Mark Twain is remembered for his novels Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but far less well known are his scathing writings about the expansion of U.S. empire, and in particular his writings on the occupation of the Philippines at the end of the 19th century, which in 2003 President Bush cited as a model for the occupation of Iraq. In 1906, Mark Twain penned these remarks on the aftermath of a massacre of Moros in the Philippines.
This incident burst upon the world last Friday in an official cablegram from the commander of our forces in the Philippines to our government at Washington. The substance of it was as follows. A tribe of Moros, dark-skinned Muslims, had fortified themselves in the bowl of an extinct crater not many miles from Jolo. And as they were hostiles and bitter against us because we've been trying for 8 years to take their liberties away from them, their presence in that position was a menace. Our commander, General Leonard Wood, ordered a reconnaissance. It was found that the Moros numbered 600, counting women and children, that their crater bowl was in the summit of a peak or mountain 2,200 feet above sea level, and very difficult of access for Christian troops and artillery. Then General Wood ordered a surprise, and went along himself to see the order carried out. Our troops climbed the heights by devious and difficult trails, and even took some artillery with them. The kind of artillery is not specified, but in one place it was hoisted up a sharp acclivity by a tackle, a distance of some 300 feet. Arrived at the rim of the crater, the battle began. Our soldiers numbered 540. They were assisted by auxiliaries consisting of a detachment of native constabulary in our pay, their numbers not given, and by a naval detachment whose numbers are not stated either. But apparently the contending parties were about equal as to number, 600 men on our side, and on the edge of the bowl, 600 men, women, and children in the bottom of the bowl. Depth of the bowl, 50 feet. General Wood's order was kill or capture the 600. The battle began. It is officially called by that name. Our forces firing down into the crater with their artillery and their deadly small arms of precision. The savages furiously returning the fire, probably with brickbats, though this is merely a surmise of mine, as the weapons used by the savages are not nominated in the cablegram. Heretofore the Moros have used knives and clubs mainly, also ineffectual trade muskets when they had any. The official report stated that the battle was fought with prodigious energy on both sides during a day and a half, and that it ended with a complete victory for the American arms. The completeness of the victory is established by this fact, that of the 600 Moros, not one was left alive. The brilliancy of the victory is established by this other fact, to wit, that of our 600 heroes, only 15 lost their lives. The official report quite properly extolled and magnified the heroism and gallantry of our troops, lamented the loss of the 15 who perished, and elaborated the wounds of the 32 of our men who suffered injury, and even minutely and faithfully described the nature of the wounds in the interest of future historians of the United States. It mentioned that a private had one of his elbows scraped by a missile. Another private had the end of his nose scraped by a missile. His name was also mentioned by cable at $1.50 a word. Next day's news confirmed the previous day's report, named our 15 killed and 32 wounded again, and once more described the wounds and gilded them with the right adjectives. So far as I can find out, there was only one person among our 80 millions who allowed himself the privilege of a public remark on this great occasion. That was the President of the United States. All day Friday, he was as studiously silent as the rest. But on Saturday, he recognized that his duty required him to say something, and he took his pen and performed that duty. If I know President Roosevelt, and I'm sure I do, this utterance cost him more pain and shame than any other that ever issued from his pen or his mouth. This is what he said. General Wood, Manila, I congratulate you and the officers and men of your command upon the brilliant feat of arms wherein you and they so well upheld the honor of the American flag. Signed, Theodore Roosevelt. His whole utterance is merely a convention. Not a word of what he said came out of his heart. He knew perfectly well that to pen 600 helplessly and largely weaponless people in a hole like rats in a trap and massacre them in detail during a stretch of a day and a half from a safe position on the heights above was no brilliant feat of arms, and would not have been a brilliant feat of arms even if Christian America, represented by its salaried soldiers, had shot them down with Bibles and the Golden Rule instead of bullets. He knew perfectly well that our uniformed assassins had not upheld the honor of the American flag, but had done as they have been doing continuously for 8 years in the Philippines. That is to say, they had dishonored it. Sunday brought us additional news, still more splendid news, still more honor for the flag, shouted at us in stentorian capitals. Women slain in Moro slaughter. With children they mixed in mob, in crater, and all died together. The next headlines blazed with American and Christian glory, like to the sun in the zenith. Death list is now 900. I was never so enthusiastically proud of the flag till now.
Welcome, Danny. Emma Goldman, a fierce anarchist and feminist orator, agitator, organizer, opponent of war. When the World War broke out in Europe in 1914 and before the United States entered the war, she gave this speech in San Francisco.
What is patriotism? Is it love of one's birthplace, the place of childhood's recollections and hopes, dreams and aspirations? Patriotism, sir, is the last resort of scoundrels. Said Dr. Johnson, Leo Tolstoy, the greatest anti-patriot of our times, defines patriotism as the principle that will justify the training of wholesale murderers, a trade that requires better equipment for the exercise of man-killing than the making of such necessities of life as shoes, clothing, and houses, a trade that guarantees better returns and greater glory than that of the average working man. Indeed, conceit, arrogance, and egotism are the essentials of patriotism. Let me illustrate. Patriotism assumes that our globe is divided into little spots, each one surrounded by an iron gate. Those who have had the fortune of being born onto some particular spot consider themselves better, nobler, grander, more intelligent than the living beings inhabiting any other spot. It is, therefore, the duty of everyone living on that chosen spot to fight, kill, and die in the attempt to impose his superiority upon all the others. The inhabitants of all the other spots reason in like manner, of course, with the result that, from early infancy, the mind of the child is poisoned with the blood-curdling stories about the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Russians, etc. When the child has reached manhood, he is thoroughly saturated with the belief that he is chosen by the Lord himself to defend his country against attack or invasion of any foreigner. It is for that purpose that we are clamoring for a greater army and navy, more battleships and ammunition. We Americans claim to be a peace-loving people. We hate bloodshed. We are opposed to violence. Yet we go into spasms of joy over the possibility of projecting dynamite bombs from flying machines upon helpless citizens. Our hearts swell with pride at the thought that America is becoming the most powerful nation on earth, and that it will eventually plant her iron foot on the necks of all other nations. Such is the logic of patriotism. Thinking men and women the world over are beginning to realize that patriotism is too narrow and limited a conception to meet the necessities of our time. The centralization of power has brought into being an international feeling of solidarity among the oppressed nations of the world. A solidarity which represents a greater harmony of interests between the working men of America and his brothers abroad than between the American miner and his exploiting compatriot. A solidarity which fears not foreign invasion, because it is bringing all the workers to the point when they will say to their masters, "Go and do your own killing. We have done it long enough for you."
Ooh.
The economic crisis of the 1930s led to a wave of strikes and union organizing throughout the country. Stella Nowicki was one of the many rank-and-file activists who tried to organize unions in the meat-packing factories of Chicago. Here she speaks about the conditions in the plants and the tactics radicals used to organize unions.
I ran away from home at age 17. I had to because there was not enough money to feed the family in 1933 during the Depression. I was doing housework for $4 a week and I hated it. So Herb suggested that I get a job in the stockyards. One of the ways to get a job was to go down to the employment office. Every morning you got there by 6 or 6:30. There were just so many benches and they would all be filled early. They would only need one, maybe two people. This woman, Mrs. McCann, women's hiring director, would look around for the biggest and brawniest person. "Have you had any experience?" she asked. I said, "Well, not in the stockyards, but we used to butcher our own hogs at home." I carried this big steel, and that impressed her. Mrs. McCann hired me. In 1933-34, we worked 6-hour shifts at 37.5 cents an hour. We would have to work at a high rate of speed. It was summer. It would be so hot that women used to pass out. The ladies' room was on the floor below, and I would help carry these women down almost vertical stairs into the washroom. We started talking union. The thing that precipitated it is that on the floor below they used to make hot dogs, and one of the women, in putting the meat into the chopper, got her fingers caught. There were no safety guards. Her fingers got into the hot dogs and they were chopped off. It was just horrible. 3 of us colonizers had a meeting during our break and decided this was the time to have a stoppage. And we did. All 6 floors went on strike. We just stopped working right inside the building, protesting the speed and the unsafe conditions. We got the company to put in safety devices. Soon after the work stoppage, the supervisors were looking for the leaders because people were talking up the action. They found out who was involved, and we were all fired. I was blacklisted. I got a job doing housework again, and it was just horrible. I just hated it. Couldn't stand it. I would rather go back and work in a factory any day or night. A friend of mine who had been laid off told me that she got called to go back to work. Meanwhile, she had gotten a job in an office, and she didn't want to go back to the stockyards, so she asked me if I wanted to go in her place. She had used the name Helen Ellis. I went down to the stockyards, and it was the same department, exactly the same job, on the same floor where I had been fired. But it was the afternoon, and Mrs. McCann wasn't there. Her assistant was. And she told me that I would start work the following afternoon. I got my hair cut really short and hennaed. I thinned my eyebrows and penciled them, wore a lot of lipstick and painted my nails. I came in looking sharp and not like a country girl, so I passed right through and I was hired as Helen Ellis on the same job. After several days, the forelady, Mary, who was also Polish, came around and said, "Okay, Helen, I know you're Stella. I won't say anything, but just keep quiet." She knew I was pro-union, and I guess she was too, so I kept the job as Helen Ellis until I got laid off. Later on, I was blacklisted under the name Ellis. If you even talked union, you were fired. So we actually had secret meetings. Everybody had to vouch for anyone that they brought to the meeting. When I look back now, I really think we had a lot of guts. But I didn't even stop to think about it at the time. It was something that had to be done. We had a goal. That's what we felt had to be done, and we did it.
In the 1930s, Sylvia Woods was a pioneer in the struggle of African American and women trade unionists. And here she describes her first experiences with racism.
I was born March 15th, 1909. My father was a roofer, and he was a union man. I used to brag that my father makes $8 a day. But he taught me, you've got to belong to a union. If I wasn't in the union, I wouldn't make $8 a day. When I was maybe 10 years old, I changed schools. On the way to school, I had to go through a park that was for white people only. We could walk through the park, but we couldn't stop at all, just pass through it. There were swings in this park, and I, so much wanted sometimes just to stop and swing a little while. But we couldn't because we were black. I would walk through this park to my school where there weren't any swings. Every morning, all the kids would line up according to classrooms, and we would have prayers and sing the Star-Spangled Banner, and then we would march to our respective groups after this business. I decided I wasn't going to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. I just stood there every morning, and I didn't sing it. One morning, one of the teachers noticed that I wasn't doing it. So she very quietly called me over and asked me why I didn't sing the Star-Spangled Banner. I said I just didn't feel like singing it. So she said, well, then you have to go into the principal and explain that to him. All of the children in the school take part, and you've got to do so too. Okay. I went into the principal, and he asked me why I wasn't singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Finally, I told him, because it says, the land of the free and the home of the brave. And this is not the land of the free. I don't know who's brave. But I am not going to sing it anymore. And then he said, why, you've been singing it all the time, haven't you? How come you want to stop now? And I told him about coming through the park, and if I could not swing in those swings in that park, and if I couldn't sit in that park, and if I could only walk in Shakespeare's park, then it couldn't be the land of the free. Who's free? And then he said, well, you could pledge your allegiance to the flag. And I said, it's not my flag. The flag is with freedom. If the land is free and the flag is mine, then how come I can't do like the white kids do? He didn't say anything.
Japanese-American civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, who was born in San Pedro, California, was a member of a family that was among the 120,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast who were rounded up in a wave of anti-Japanese hysteria that followed the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Here she recalls her experiences in the detention camps.
I was red, white, and blue when I was growing up. I taught Sunday school and was very, very American, but I was also very provincial. We were just kids rooting for our high school. I was 19 at the time of the evacuation. I had just finished junior college. I was looking for a job and didn't realize how different the school world was from the work world. In the school world, I never felt racism. But when you got into the work world, it was very difficult. This was 1941, just before the war. I finally did get a job at a department store. For us back then, it was a big thing because I don't think they had ever hired an Asian in a department store before. I tried because I saw a Mexican friend who got a job there. Everything changed for me on the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. On that very day, December 7th, the FBI came and took my father. He had just come home from the hospital the day before. For several days, we didn't know where they had taken him. Then we had found out that he was taken to the federal prison at Terminal Island. Overnight, things changed for us. Most Japanese Americans had to give up their jobs, whatever they did, and were told they had to leave. The edict for 9066, President Roosevelt's edict for evacuation, was in February 1942. We were moved to a detention center that April. We were sent to an assembly center in Arcadia, California, in April. It was the largest assembly center in the West Coast, having nearly 20,000 people. There were some smaller centers with about 600 people along the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California. There were many, many assembly centers, but ours was the largest. Most of the assembly centers were either fairgrounds or racetracks, so many of us lived in stables. They said we could take only what we could carry. I was so red, white, and blue. I couldn't believe this was happening to us. America would never do a thing like this to us. This was the greatest country in the world. So I thought, this is only going to be for a short while, maybe a few weeks or something, and they'll let us go back. At the beginning, no one realized how long this would go on. I didn't feel anger that much because I thought maybe this was the way we could show our love for our country. And we should not make too much fuss or noise. We should abide by what they asked of us. I'm a totally different person now than I was back then. I was naive about so many things. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how little you learn about American history. It's just what they want you to know. We always called the camps relocation centers while we were there. Now we feel it is apropos to call them concentration camps. It is not the same as the concentration camps of Europe. We feel they were death camps. Concentration camps were a concentration of people placed in an area and disempowered and disenfranchised. So it is apropos to call what I was in a concentration camp. Historically, Americans have always been putting people behind walls. First, there were the American Indians who were put on reservations, Africans in slavery on their lives on plantations, Chicanos doing migratory work in the kind of camps they lived in, and even to the Chinese when they worked on the railroad camps, where they were almost isolated, dispossessed people, disempowered. And I feel those are the things we should fight against so they won't happen again. This whole period of what the Japanese went through is important. If we can see the connections of how often this happens in history, we can stem the tide of these things happening again by speaking out against them.
In In August of 1963, there was the Great March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. 200,000 people were there, and everybody remembers Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, but the most militant speech of the day was delivered by John Lewis, a student leader from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He's from Alabama. But he was pressured by established civil rights leaders to tone down his speech. But here is the part of the original speech that he had hoped to deliver that day.
We march today for jobs and freedom, but we have nothing to be proud of. For hundreds and thousands of our brothers and sisters are not here. They have no money for their transportation, for they are receiving starvation wages, or no wages at all. In good conscience, we cannot support the administration's civil rights bill, for it is too little and too late. The voting section of this bill would not help thousands of black citizens who want to vote. It would not help the citizens of Mississippi, of Alabama, of Georgia, who are qualified to vote but lack a sixth grade education. We are now involved in revolution. This nation is still a place of cheap political leaders who build their careers on immoral compromise and ally themselves with open forms of political, economic, and social exploitation. What political leader here can stand up and say, my party is a party of principle? The party of Kennedy is also the party of Eastland. The party of Jarvis is also the party of Goldwater. Where is our party? The revolution is at hand, and we must free ourselves of the chains of political and economic slavery. The nonviolent revolution is saying we will not wait for the courts to act. We have been waiting for hundreds of years. We will not wait for the president, the Justice Department, the Congress, but we will take matters into our own hands and create a source of power outside any national structure that could and would assure us of victory. To those who have said, be patient and wait, we must say that patience is a dirty and nasty word. We cannot be patient. We do not want to be free gradually. We want our freedom, and we want it now. We cannot depend on any political party, for both the Democrats and the Republicans have betrayed the basic principles of the Declaration of Independence. We all recognize the fact that if any radical social, political, and economic changes are to take place in this society, the people, the masses, must bring them about. Mr. Kennedy is trying to take the revolution out of the streets and put it into the courts. Listen, Mr. Kennedy. Listen, Mr. Congressman. Listen, fellow citizens. The black masses are on the march for jobs and for freedom. And we must say to the politicians that there won't be a cooling off period. We won't stop now. All the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman won't stop the revolution. The time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the heart of Dixie, the way Sherman did. We shall pursue our own scorched earth policy and burn Jim Crow to the ground. Burn Jim Crow to the ground nonviolently. We shall fragment the South into 1,000 pieces and put them back together in the image of democracy. We will make the action of the past few months look petty. And as I say to you, wake up, America.
Macomb, Mississippi in July 1965, civil rights activists in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party circulated one of the first petitions against the war in Vietnam.
Here are 5 reasons why Negroes should not be in any war fighting for America. Number 1, no Mississippi Negroes should be fighting in Vietnam for the white man's freedom until all the Negro people are free in Mississippi. Number 2, Negro boys should not honor the draft here in Mississippi. Mothers should encourage their sons not to go. Number 3, we will gain respect and dignity as a race only by forcing the U.S. government and the Mississippi government to come with guns, dogs, and trucks to take our sons away to fight and be killed, protecting Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. Number 4, no one has a right to ask us to risk our lives and kill other colored people in Santo Domingo and Vietnam so that the white American can get richer. We will be looked upon as traitors by all the colored people of the world if the Negro people continue to fight and die without a cause. Number 5, last week a white soldier from New Jersey was discharged from the Army because he refused to fight in Vietnam. He went on a hunger strike. Negro boys can do the same thing. We can write and ask our sons if they know what they are fighting for. If he says freedom, tell him that's what we are fighting for here in Mississippi. And if he says democracy, tell him the truth. We don't know anything about communism, socialism, and all that, but we do know that Negroes have caught hell right here under this American democracy.
Frederick Douglass, former slave, editor of the abolition newspaper, the North Star, was asked to give a speech in 1852 in Rochester on the 4th of July.
Mr. President, friends and fellow citizens, he who could address this audience without a quailing sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before an assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. A feeling has crept over me quite unfavorably to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and the natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty in which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and quality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despots of the old world. Travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Two of the first people to speak out against the use of September 11th as a pretext for war were Orlando and Phyllis Rodriguez. Their son Gregory, then only 31 years old, was killed that day while working on the 103rd floor of One World Trade Center. The Rodriguezes sent this open letter to the New York Times and other newspapers 4 days after September 11th.
Nuestro hijo Greg está entre los muchos que faltan después del ataque de las Torres Gemelas. Desde que supimos de la noticia, hemos compartido momentos de tristeza, consuelo, esperanza, desesperación, felices memorias con su esposa, las dos familias, nuestros amigos y vecinos y sus cariñosos colegas de Cantor Fitzgerald East Speed, y todas las familias en luto que se reúnen a diario en el Hotel Pierre. Vemos nuestro dolor y rabia reflejado entre todos que conocemos. No podemos prestar atención al flujo diario de noticias sobre este desastre. pero leemos lo suficiente de las noticias para sentir que nuestro gobierno sigue un camino de venganza violenta, con la posibilidad de hijos, padres, amigos en países lejanos sufriendo y en generando más quejas contra nosotros. No es el camino que seguir. Nuestro hijo se murió víctima de una ideología inhumana. Nuestras acciones no deben servir el mismo propósito. Déjenos estar en luto. Reflejemos y recemos. Pensemos en una respuesta razonable que traiga paz y justicia verdadera a nuestro modo. Pero no dejemos que contribuyamos como nación a la inhumanidad de nuestra época. Our son Greg is among the many missing from the World Trade Center attack. Since we first heard the news, we've shared moments of grief, comfort, hope, despair, fond memories with his wife, the two families and her friends and neighbors, his loving colleagues at Cantor Fitzgerald Eastmead, and all the grieving families that daily meet at the Pierre Hotel. We see our hurt and anger reflected among everybody we meet. We cannot pay attention to the daily flow of news about this disaster, but we read enough of the news to sense that our government is heading in the direction of violent revenge, with the prospect of our sons, daughters, and parents, friends in distant lands dying, suffering, and nursing further grievances against us. It is not the way to go. It will not avenge our son's death, not in our son's name. Our son died, a victim of inhuman ideology. Our actions should not serve the same purpose. Let us grieve. Let us reflect and pray. Let us think about a rational response that brings real peace and justice to our world. But let us not, as a nation, add to the inhumanity of our times.
We end with something that's not in our book because this is too recent. There's a speech by Cindy Sheehan, whose son Casey was killed in action in Iraq on April 4th, 2004, and she delivered a speech in August at the Veterans for Peace Convention in Dallas, Texas. This is before she was heading down to camp outside of Bush's vacation home in Crawford. President Bush refused to meet with her, but she helped galvanize sentiment against the occupation of Iraq.
I said to my son not to go. I said, you know it's wrong. You know you're going over there. You know your unit might have to kill innocent people. You know you might die. And he says, my buddies are going. If I don't go, my buddies will be in danger. 30 of our bravest men have already died this month. And it's only the 5th of August. And the tragedy of the Marines in Ohio is awful. But do you think George Bush will interrupt his vacation and go visit the families of the 20 Marines that have died in Ohio this week? No. Because he doesn't care. He doesn't have a heart. Not enough to stop his little playing cowboy game in Crawford for 5 weeks. So, as you can imagine, every day the grieving parents that have lost I don't like to use that word. The parent whose child was murdered, it's extremely difficult. You can't even get a small scab on our wound because every day it's ripped open. So anyway, when that filth spewer and warmonger George Bush was speaking after the tragedy of the Marines in Ohio, he said a couple of things that outraged me. Seriously, outraged me. George Bush was talking, and he never mentioned the terrible incident of those Marines. But he did say that the families of the ones who have been killed can rest assured that their loved ones died for a noble cause. He also said, he says this often, and this really drives me crazy. He said that we have to stay in Iraq and complete the mission to honor the sacrifices of the ones who have fallen. And I say, why should I want one more mother to go through what I've gone through? Because my son is dead. You know what? The only way he can honor my son's sacrifice is to bring the rest of our troops home. To make my son's death count for peace and love, not war and hatred like Bush stands for. I don't want him using my son's death or my family's sacrifice to continue the killing. I don't want him to exploit the honor of my son and others to continue the killing. And I just had this brainstorm. I'm going to Crawford. I don't know where Crawford is, but I don't care. I'm going. And I'm going to go, and I'm going to tell him, you get that evil maniac out here because a Gold Star mother, somebody whose son's blood is on his hands, has questions for him. And I'm going to say, okay, listen here, George. Number one, I demand every time you get up and spew the filth that you're continuing the killing in Iraq to honor my son's sacrifice, honoring the fallen heroes by continuing the mission, you say, accept Casey Sheehan. You don't have permission to use my son's name. And I'm going to say, and you tell me what the noble cause is that my son died for. And even if he starts to say freedom and democracy, I'm going to say bullshit. You tell me the truth. You tell me that my son died for oil. You tell me that my son died to make your friends rich. You tell me my son died so you can spread the cancer of Pax Americana, imperialism in the Middle East. You get America out of Iraq, you get Israel out of Palestine, and you'll stop the terrorism. And if you think I won't say bullshit to the president, then you're wrong. Because I'll say what's on my mind. So anyway, I'm going to Crawford tomorrow, and I'm going to say, get George here. And if they say no, he's not coming out, then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to put up my tent here, and I'm staying until he comes and he talks to me. And another thing that I'm doing is, my son was killed in 2004, so I'm not paying my taxes for 2004. And I tell everybody that If I get a letter from the IRS, I'm going to say, you killed my son for this. I don't owe you anything. I live in Vacaville, California. If you can find me there, come and get me and put me on trial. It's up to us as moral people to break immoral laws and resist. And as soon as the leaders of a country lie to you, they have no authority over you. These maniacs have no authority over us. They might be able to put our bodies in prison, but they can't put our spirits in prison. When I was growing up, it was communists. Now it's terrorists. So you always have to have somebody that's our enemy to be afraid of, so the war machine can build more bombs and guns and bullets and everything. But I do see hope. I see hope in this country. 58% of the American public are with us. We're preaching to the choir, but not everybody in the choir is singing. Mm-hmm. If all of the 58% started singing, this war would end.
Want to thank this terrific bunch of readers, people who came here to be with us tonight. Viggo Mortensen and Marissa Tomei, Sandra Oh, and Christina Kirk, and Josh Brolin, and Vanessa Martinez, and Leslie Silva, and Floyd Red Crow Westerman, and Kerry Washington, and Danny Glover, and my friend Anthony Arnaud. And thank you all for being here.